I kept my fork frozen halfway to my mouth. My future mother-in-law smiled as she sipped her wine. My future father-in-law nodded thoughtfully, and the man sitting beside me, the man I was supposed to marry 3 days later, didn't look surprised at all. 6 months is safer, his father replied in French. If she suspects anything too soon, it becomes complicated. My heartbeat slammed against my ribs. They thought I couldn't understand them. They thought the American soldier at the table was smiling politely while they discussed weekend travel plans. Instead, I was listening to them discuss my future like I wasn't even a person, like I was an investment, a temporary inconvenience, a woman they intended to use. Then my future mother-in-law laughed softly. She's older than Daniel anyway. By the time she realizes what's happening, it won't matter. The room suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. I lowered my fork. No one noticed because they were still talking, still planning, still assuming I was deaf to every word. And in that moment, I realized I might not have a wedding after all. But to explain how I ended up sitting at that table, you need to understand what my life looked like before that dinner. My name is Sarah Whitmore. At the time, I was 42 years old and serving as a lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Army. I had spent more than 20 years in uniform, 2 deployments overseas, countless missed holidays, more military funerals than I care to remember. Most people imagine military life as action movies and dramatic speeches. The reality is much quieter. It's waking up before dawn, missing birthdays, eating dinner alone, learning how to keep moving forward when nobody sees how tired you are. By 42, I had accepted something. I might never get married. Not because I didn't want to. Life had simply moved in a different direction. Then I met Daniel. Daniel Hart was charming without trying to be. At least that's what I thought. He was an architect in Northern Virginia, divorced once, no children, a year younger than me. We met during a charity fundraiser supporting veterans transitioning into civilian careers. While everyone else wanted to talk about military stories, Daniel wanted to talk about books. That was refreshing. For 2 hours, we discussed history, travel, and architecture. Not once did he ask whether I had ever fired a weapon. Not once did he call me a hero. He treated me like a normal woman. And after 20 years of being viewed as a soldier first, that felt wonderful. Our relationship moved slowly. At my age, slow felt healthy. There were no games, no dramatic breakups, no whirlwind romance, just 2 adults building a life together. Or so I believed. When Daniel proposed, I said yes without hesitation. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine a future beyond military service. A home, a marriage, maybe even retirement. 3 months before our wedding, I officially submitted a leave request. The approval came through on a Thursday morning, after years of missing important family events because of military obligations. I would actually be free for my own wedding. I smiled all day. My staff probably thought I'd won the lottery. In a way, I felt like I had. That evening, Daniel took me out to dinner. We talked about seating charts, flowers, and honeymoon plans. Everything felt normal, comfortable, safe. Then he mentioned something that would later haunt me. My parents are finally coming, he said. They booked their flights. Yep, they'll arrive Tuesday. I nodded. I'd never met them. His parents lived outside Lyon, France. They rarely visited the United States. Most of our communication had happened through video calls. Those calls were polite enough, though if I was being honest, something always felt slightly off. His mother smiled often, but her eyes never seemed warm. His father asked detailed questions about my career, my pension, and my future retirement plans. At the time, I assumed it was cultural. Maybe Europeans were simply more direct. Daniel certainly acted like everything was normal. So I ignored the uneasy feeling. 3 days before the wedding, they arrived. I met them at the airport. His mother greeted me with air kisses. His father shook my hand. Both were impeccably dressed, elegant, sophisticated, the kind of people who made everyone else feel slightly underdressed. "Sarah," his mother said, "you look exactly as Daniel described." I smiled. "Hopefully that's a good thing." "Of course," she replied. Yet, something in her tone felt impossible to read. That evening, Daniel suggested a private family dinner. Nothing fancy, just the 5 of us. A chance to get acquainted before the wedding. The reservation was at a small, upscale restaurant overlooking the Potomac River. White tablecloths, soft music, candlelight. The kind of place people choose when they're celebrating something important. At first, the evening went well. We talked about travel, food, family traditions, wedding plans. Then little things began happening. His parents repeatedly switched into French. At first, I didn't think much of it. Plenty of bilingual families do that naturally. Every time they finished speaking French, they exchanged glances. Then, they looked at me. Sometimes, they smiled. Sometimes, they didn't. But it happened often enough that I noticed. Daniel never translated, not once. "What's so funny?" I asked at one point. His mother waved a hand dismissively. "Oh, nothing important." Then, she changed the subject. I should have trusted my instincts right there. Because there was something Daniel didn't know, something none of them knew. Years earlier, during a NATO assignment, I'd spent nearly 3 years working alongside French military officers. I spoke French fluently, not perfectly, but fluently enough to understand every word being spoken at that table. And as dinner continued, I quietly listened. The first comments seemed harmless, then they became personal, then disturbing, then devastating. By the time dessert arrived, I was no longer listening out of curiosity. I was listening because my entire future depended on it. And when my future father-in-law leaned forward and calmly discussed how long Daniel should remain married before separating from me, I realized the wedding wasn't the only thing in danger. Everything I thought I knew about the man beside me was beginning to collapse. I had spent more than 20 years in the army. One thing military service teaches you is how to keep your face neutral when your world is falling apart. So, I didn't react, not immediately. I didn't slam my hands on the table. I didn't accuse anyone. I didn't storm out of the restaurant. Instead, I took a slow sip of water and kept listening. Because once you discover people are lying to you, emotions become a luxury. Information becomes everything. Across the table, Daniel's father cut into his dessert and continued speaking in French. "She trusts him completely," he said. "Of course, she does," Daniel's mother replied. "Look at her. She still believes this marriage is about love." The 3 of them laughed quietly, Daniel included. That hurt more than anything. Not the words, not the insults, the laughter. The easy, casual laughter of people discussing my life like I was an object sitting on a shelf. My stomach twisted. Still, I remained silent. Daniel glanced at me. "You okay?" I smiled. "Just tired. Wedding stress." Something like that. He squeezed my hand, the same hand that would soon wear a wedding ring, the same hand he had apparently been planning to let go of all along. I nearly pulled away. Instead, I smiled again. The performance continued. The conversation shifted back into French. After the wedding, his father said the house becomes the key. I felt my pulse quicken. The house. The home Daniel and I had purchased 18 months earlier. The home I had invested most of the down payment into. The home where I imagined spending retirement. Daniel nodded. "Eventually, yes. Eventually." Such a harmless word. Unless you're discussing betrayal. How long, his mother asked. 6 months, his father suggested. Daniel shrugged. A year at most. A year. A year of lies. A year of pretending. A year of sharing a bed with someone who already had one foot out the door. His mother smiled approvingly. That's reasonable. Then came the sentence that changed everything. By then Paris will be ready. I froze. Paris? Daniel had never mentioned moving to Paris. Not once. We had discussed retirement, travel, future plans. None of them involved France. Yet now they were speaking as though the decision had already been made. What about the American his father asked? Daniel smirked. I'll handle Sarah. Handle Sarah? Not discuss it with me. Not ask me. Handle me. Like a problem. Like paperwork. Like something standing between him and what he wanted. I felt a sharp ache in my chest. For a moment I couldn't hear anything else. Then his mother spoke again. She served in the military her whole life. She's practical. She'll survive. I looked down at my plate. The irony almost made me laugh. The army had taught me that much. The conversation continued. And somehow it became worse. Far worse. I learned that Daniel had been communicating regularly with a woman named Camille in Paris. An ex-girlfriend. Not a recent acquaintance. An example. Someone his parents clearly adored. Someone they had hoped he would marry years ago. Camille understands him, his mother said. She always did. Daniel smiled. Things are complicated. Not for long, his father replied. My appetite disappeared completely. The restaurant noise faded into the background. All I could hear was betrayal. Sentence after sentence, lie after lie, memory after memory being rewritten in real time. Every anniversary, every promise, every future plan. Suddenly I was questioning all of it. Had any of it been real? Or had I simply been convenient? A financially stable military officer approaching retirement. A woman with good credit. A woman with a pension. A woman who trusted him. The answer arrived moments later. His father provided it. You've always chosen practical solutions. Daniel nodded. Sarah was the right choice. Was, not is. Was. As though the decision had already been made. As though I was already in the past. I looked around the table. 3 people. 3 conspirators. 3 people completely confident they controlled the situation. And not one of them realized I understood every word. The waiter arrived carrying dessert menus. Nobody wanted one. The moment created a brief silence. Daniel smiled at me. You seem quiet tonight. I stared at him. For just a second. Long enough to see something I had never noticed before. Not kindness. Not warmth. Calculation. Then I smiled back. I'm listening. The statement was true. Just not in the way he thought. The waiter cleared several plates. Wine glasses were refilled. The conversation resumed. His mother leaned toward Daniel. You should tell her after the move. Obviously, he replied. There's no reason to create problems early. That was enough. I suddenly felt something unexpected. Not anger. Clarity. Pure cold clarity. The kind that arrives when all doubt disappears. For weeks, I'd ignored warning signs. For months, I'd explained away strange behavior. For years, I'd believed love required trust. Now the truth sat directly in front of me. And the truth was simple. These people thought I was stupid. Not because I was unintelligent. Because they had never bothered to learn who I really was. They saw a woman, a soldier, an American, nothing more. They never imagined I might speak French. Never imagined I might understand every insult, every plan, every betrayal. I set my fork down. The tiny sound seemed louder than it should have. Nobody noticed. Daniel's father was still speaking. His mother was still smiling. Daniel was still pretending. I looked at each of them one by one. Then I spoke in French, perfect fluent French. Perhaps you should discuss your conspiracy somewhere other than directly in front of the woman you're planning to betray. The effect was immediate, absolute, total silence. His mother's wine glass stopped halfway to her lips. His father blinked twice. Daniel's face lost all color. The restaurant noise seemed to disappear. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody breathed. For several seconds, the entire table looked frozen. Then Daniel whispered in English, "Sarah." I held up a hand. "Number." Still in French, "Please don't insult me further by pretending this is a misunderstanding." His father stared at me. "You understand French?" Every word. His mother's face turned pale. Daniel looked physically ill. Good. For the first time all evening, they understood exactly how vulnerable they were. I stood slowly, picked up my purse, placed my napkin neatly beside my plate, then I looked directly at Daniel. "Enjoy your dessert." And I walked away. Behind me, nobody followed. Nobody called my name. Nobody tried to stop me. Because for the first time that night, the people who thought they held all the power had absolutely none. And as I stepped into the cool Virginia night, I realized something. The wedding wasn't merely postponed. The life I thought I was about to begin had just ended. And I had no idea how much worse the truth was about to become. I didn't sleep that night, not even for a minute. I drove home from the restaurant on autopilot, barely remembering the route. The radio was off. My phone sat face down in the passenger seat, vibrating every few minutes. Daniel, again and again and again. By midnight, he'd called 17 times. By 2 o'clock in the morning, the number had climbed past 30. I never answered. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing how thoroughly I had been fooled. For years, I had trusted this man. I had shared my home with him, introduced him to my closest friends, talked about retirement, talked about growing old together. Now, I was sitting alone in my kitchen wondering whether any of it had been real. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I finally made coffee. Military habits die hard. When emotions become overwhelming, focus on the mission, one step at a time, one objective at a time. The objective was simple. Find out how much Daniel had been hiding. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time, I answered. Not because I wanted to hear his voice, because I wanted information. "Sarah." His voice sounded exhausted. "Please let me explain." I stared out the kitchen window. "Explain which part?" Silence. "Sarah." "The part where you plan to move to Paris." More silence. "The part where your parents discussed taking my house." Silence again. "The part where your ex-girlfriend is waiting for you." His breathing changed. That told me everything. "Sarah, it's not what you think." I almost laughed. Every liar in history had probably used that exact sentence. "Then what is it?" "I can explain." "Great," I said calmly. "Start with the truth." He didn't. Instead, he offered excuses, context, misunderstandings, cultural differences, poor wording, anything except honesty. After 10 minutes, I ended the call, not because I was angry, because I was done listening. That afternoon, I called the wedding venue, then the florist, then the caterer. I didn't cancel anything yet. The woman at the venue sounded concerned. "Is everything okay?" "No," I said honestly, "not really." After that, I made another call. This one was to an attorney, a very good attorney, one recommended by a retired colonel I trusted. His name was Michael Reeves, and unlike Daniel, Michael didn't waste time. After hearing my story, he leaned back in his chair. "Do you have proof?" "Not yet." "Then let's get some." I liked him immediately. For the next week, my life became an investigation. Fortunately, investigations weren't unfamiliar territory. Military leadership teaches you to verify information before making decisions. Assumptions get people hurt. Facts save lives. So, I focused on facts. The first surprise came from our mortgage documents, or rather the documents I thought I knew. Michael requested updated records. When they arrived, he frowned. That doesn't look right. My stomach tightened. What? He slid a page across the desk. Did you approve this? I looked down. My heart stopped. A home equity line of credit, nearly $120,000, opened 8 months earlier, using our property as collateral. My signature appeared on the paperwork, except it wasn't my signature. Not exactly. It was close enough to fool most people, but not me. Someone had forged it. Michael looked at me carefully. You didn't authorize this. Number? Then we have a problem. The room suddenly felt smaller. I stared at the document. Daniel had never mentioned this, not once. $120,000. Where had the money gone? The answer arrived 2 days later. Michael's financial investigator found it. Most of the funds had been transferred through a series of accounts connected to Daniel's business. The trail wasn't impossible to follow, just hidden well enough that nobody would notice unless they were looking. We were looking, and what we found wasn't pretty. Over the next several days, more information surfaced. Business debts, private loans, credit obligations, failed investments. Daniel's financial situation was far worse than I knew. The successful architect image he'd carefully built wasn't entirely fake, but it wasn't entirely real either. He was drowning, quietly, desperately, and apparently I had been selected as a life raft. The realization hurt, not because of the money, because of what it revealed. Love been the primary motivation. Convenience had. A week after the restaurant dinner, Michael called me into his office. His expression was serious. There's something else. Those words rarely lead anywhere pleasant. What now? He handed me a folder. Inside were emails, hundreds of emails. Many translated from French, some recent, some over a year old. The sender names immediately caught my attention. Daniel, his parents, and Camille, the ex-girlfriend in Paris. My chest tightened. I began reading. The first messages were emotional, then strategic, then shocking. One email from Daniel's mother stood out. I still remember the exact translation. Sarah's military pension alone makes the marriage worthwhile. Once everything is secured, Daniel can finally return home. I read it twice, then 3 times. Not because I didn't understand it, because I did, perfectly. The marriage wasn't simply unstable. Parts of it had been planned, calculated, discussed, analyzed, like a business arrangement. Another email mentioned my retirement benefits. Another discussed property ownership. Another referred to me as the temporary solution. I closed the folder. For several moments, nobody spoke. Michael finally broke the silence. I'm sorry. Oddly enough, that simple sentence nearly broke me. Not the evidence, not the betrayal, the kindness. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, someone wasn't trying to manipulate me. Someone wasn't lying. Someone wasn't using me. Someone simply felt sorry. I took a deep breath, then another. What are my options? Michael's answer came immediately. You have excellent options. Good. You've documented everything correctly. Good. The forged signature changes everything. Even better. For the first time in days, I felt something unfamiliar. Not hope. Control. The situation wasn't fixed, but it was no longer controlling me. That evening I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. Whenever life became overwhelming, I often ended up there. I walked quietly among the rows of white headstones. Men and women who had faced impossible situations. People who had sacrificed far more than I ever had. The silence helped. The perspective helped. And somewhere during that walk, I made a decision. I wasn't interested in revenge for revenge's sake. I didn't want to destroy Daniel. I didn't want public humiliation. I didn't want screaming matches. I wanted the truth. Nothing more. Nothing less. And if the truth happened to destroy the lies surrounding him, that would be his responsibility, not mine. The next morning, I received a text message. One sentence. From Daniel. We need to talk before the wedding. I stared at the screen. Then I smiled. Because by then I had discovered something he didn't know. Something that would change everything. Something far bigger than the French conversation. Something that could expose every lie he had spent years building. And very soon, everyone was going to learn the truth. The wedding was supposed to take place on a Saturday afternoon. By Friday evening, nearly 100 guests had already arrived. Friends from the army. Family members from across the country. Neighbors. Former colleagues. People who genuinely cared about us. Or at least cared about the version of us they believed existed. I spent Friday night alone in my house. The same house Daniel had quietly planned to take. The same house I had nearly lost without realizing it. My wedding dress hung in the guest room. White. Elegant, simple, exactly what I had wanted. For months I'd imagined walking down the aisle wearing it. Now I stared at it from across the room and felt absolutely nothing. No excitement, no sadness, just certainty. At 7 o'clock that evening, Daniel called again. This time I answered. Sarah. His voice sounded desperate. Please tell me you're not going to do something crazy tomorrow. I nearly laughed. Crazy. Interesting choice of words. Do you mean exposing the truth? A long pause followed. Then he sighed. We can still fix this. No, Daniel. Please. No. You're throwing away everything. I looked around my living room. The photographs, the furniture, the life we had built, or rather the life I thought we had built. No, I said quietly. You already threw it away. Then I ended the call. For the first time in my life, I slept peacefully the night before a wedding because I knew exactly what I was going to do. The next afternoon, the church was full. Sunlight streamed through stained glass windows. Soft music played. Guests chatted quietly while waiting for the ceremony to begin. Everything looked perfect, which made the truth even more devastating. I arrived early, not in my wedding dress, in a navy blue suit, the same type of professional outfit I often wore for official events. When the wedding coordinator saw me, confusion spread across her face. Sarah. Hi, Karen. She glanced toward the bridal suite. Aren't you getting ready? I already am. Her expression changed immediately. People notice things, especially experienced wedding coordinators, and Karen had probably seen enough family drama to recognize warning signs. She didn't ask questions. For that I was grateful. One by one, guests filled the pews. I recognized dozens of faces, retired soldiers, old friends, my sister, my uncle, people who had traveled hundreds of miles to celebrate. Then Daniel arrived. His parents were with him. The moment they saw me, all three froze because they immediately noticed two things. First, I wasn't wearing a wedding dress. Second, I wasn't smiling. Daniel approached cautiously. Sarah. I remained calm. Hello, Daniel. His mother looked nervous. His father looked angry. Good. For once they weren't comfortable. Can we talk privately? Daniel asked. No. His jaw tightened. Sarah, please. I shook my head. Everything that needs to be said can be said publicly. His face went pale because suddenly he understood. Not everything, but enough. The ceremony was scheduled to begin at 2 o'clock. At exactly 2 o'clock, the music stopped. Conversations faded. Everyone turned toward the front of the church. The officiant looked confused. I couldn't blame him. This wasn't part of the plan. Then I stepped forward alone. The room grew quiet. Thank you all for being here. A few people smiled politely. They still thought a wedding was about to begin. I took a slow breath, then another. Years in uniform had taught me how to speak under pressure. This moment was no different. Many of you traveled a long way today. The room remained silent. I appreciate that more than you know. Daniel shifted uncomfortably behind me. His parents looked horrified. They knew exactly where this was heading. I continued. Unfortunately, there won't be a wedding. The reaction was immediate. Gasps, whispers, confused looks. Someone dropped a program. Several guests turned toward Daniel. Others stared at me. Nobody understood, yet. I owe everyone an explanation. Daniel stepped forward. Sarah, don't. I looked at him calmly. Why? His answer never came because we both knew the truth. I wasn't about to lie for him. I held up a folder, the same folder Michael had prepared. Inside were documents, evidence, facts, nothing more, nothing less. Over the past week, I said, I've learned some things. The church was completely silent now, no whispers, no movement, nothing. I explained the forged signature, the unauthorized loan, the hidden debts, the financial deception. I didn't exaggerate. I didn't attack. I simply presented facts. Then I discussed the emails. Not every email, just enough. Enough to establish a pattern, enough to reveal intent, enough to show that this wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a plan. As I spoke, faces throughout the church changed. Confusion became disbelief. Disbelief became shock. Shock became understanding. Daniel attempted to interrupt twice. Both times he stopped himself because every document I referenced existed. Every claim could be verified. Every fact was supported. Truth is difficult to argue with. Eventually, his father stood. This is inappropriate. His French accent seemed stronger now. I turned toward him. No. My voice remained calm. What was inappropriate was discussing how long your son should remain married before taking my home. His face flushed red. Several guests turned sharply toward him. The silence deepened. Then his mother spoke, for the first time all day. You are humiliating us. I looked directly at her. No. Another pause. The truth is humiliating you. Those words landed harder than I expected because they were true. I wasn't creating anything. I wasn't inventing accusations. I was simply removing the cover from what already existed. Daniel finally stepped forward. His shoulders slumped. The confidence he'd always carried was gone. Sarah. I waited. His voice cracked. I'm sorry. For a futurre I saw genuine regret, not regret for being caught, regret for what he'd become. But it was too late. Some apologies arrive after the damage is done. This was one of them. I nodded politely. I believe you are. Then I placed the folder on a nearby table. And that was it. No dramatic exit. No screaming. No revenge speech. Just truth, simple truth. I thanked the guests for coming, apologized for their inconvenience, and walked down the aisle alone. Ironically, it was the most honest walk I'd taken all year. As I reached the church doors, sunlight flooded across the steps outside. Fresh air filled my lungs. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. Behind me, the wedding had ended before it began. But ahead of me, something new was waiting. A life built on truth. And several months later, I would receive a phone call that changed everything once again. People often imagine revenge as a dramatic ending. A victory speech. A public humiliation. A moment where the hero stands over the ruins and celebrates. Real life isn't like that. At least mine wasn't. When I left the church that afternoon, I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted, relieved, heartbroken, but mostly exhausted. 20 years in the army had taught me something important. Winning and losing are rarely as simple as people think. Sometimes everyone loses. And sometimes the best outcome is simply surviving with your dignity intact. The first few weeks after the canceled wedding were difficult. Much harder than I expected. Not because I missed Daniel. I missed the future I thought I was going to have. There's a difference. I miss the retirement plans, the vacations we talked about, the quiet mornings drinking coffee together, the dreams. Those dreams had been real to me, even if they weren't real to him. Friends called constantly. Some wanted details. Some wanted gossip. Some wanted outrage. I gave them none. I told them only what mattered. The relationship was over. The wedding was canceled. The truth had made the decision for me. Then I moved on, or at least I tried to. A month later, the legal process surrounding the forged documents moved forward. The evidence was overwhelming. Daniel eventually admitted what had happened. Not all of it, not immediately, but enough. His business suffered. Several professional relationships disappeared. People who had trusted him suddenly had questions. The reputation he spent years building began to crack. Not because I destroyed it, because deception eventually destroys itself. Meanwhile, I focused on rebuilding my own life. I returned to work, spent time with old friends, started hiking again. Little by little, the darkness lifted. One morning, about 4 months after the canceled wedding, I received an unexpected phone call. The caller ID displayed an international number. France. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. I answered. Hello. Several seconds passed. Then a familiar voice spoke. Sarah. It was Daniel's mother. I almost ended the call. Almost. Instead, I listened. What happened next surprised me. For the first time since I'd met her, she sounded old. Not elegant, not intimidating, just old and tired. I owe you an apology. I didn't respond. She continued, I should have called months ago. Still, I remained silent. Not out of anger, out of caution. People reveal themselves when you allow silence to exist. Finally, she sighed. We were wrong. Simple words, but not easy words, especially for someone like her. We judged you. Another pause. We underestimated. You. I looked out my kitchen window. The spring sunlight was shining across the backyard. Birds moved through the trees. Life continued as if none of the previous year's drama had happened. I know, I said. Her voice softened. The truth is, I never understood military service. That surprised me. She continued, my husband didn't either. For the next 15 minutes, she spoke honestly, perhaps for the first time in our relationship. She admitted they had viewed me as temporary. She admitted they had pushed Daniel toward choices he should have made himself. She admitted they had valued status more than character. Then she said something I never expected. We raised him poorly in some ways. I closed my eyes. That couldn't have been easy. No parent wants to say that, especially about their own child. When the conversation ended, she apologized again. This time I believed her. Not completely. Not perfectly. But enough. After hanging up, I sat quietly for several minutes, thinking, reflecting, considering everything that had happened. And that's when I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't about excusing behavior. It's about refusing to carry bitterness forever. I wasn't going to marry Daniel. That chapter was over. But I also wasn't interested in spending the next 20 years angry. Life is too short. Eventually, I forgave him. Not because he deserved it, because I deserved peace. Several months later, Daniel reached out. Not to reconcile. Not to restart the relationship. Just to apologize. Properly. The conversation lasted less than 10 minutes. But it was honest. For once. When it ended, I wished him well. And I meant it. Some stories end with people finding their way back to each other. This wasn't one of those stories. Daniel and I never reunited. We never became friends. We simply became part of each other's past. And strangely enough, that was exactly what needed to happen. Today, I spend much of my time mentoring younger veterans. Men and women transitioning into civilian life. People trying to build futures after military service. Sometimes they ask about relationships, trust, second chances. When they do, I tell them this story. Not because it's dramatic, not because it's painful, but because it contains a lesson I learned the hard way. Never ignore what people consistently show you. Listen carefully. Watch closely. Pay attention to actions more than words. And never underestimate your own worth. The funny thing is, the most important moment in this entire story wasn't the canceled wedding. It wasn't the forged documents. It wasn't even the public exposure. That quiet dinner where 3 people assumed a soldier at the table couldn't understand French. Their mistake wasn't speaking another language. Their mistake was assuming they knew who I was. They saw a woman approaching middle age, a soldier, an American. What they failed to see was a person with experience, intelligence, and strength they couldn't measure. And that's the lesson I hope stays with you. Respect cannot be faked. Trust must be earned. Character matters more than charm. And sometimes the person everyone underestimates is the one paying the closest attention. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to reflect on the people you've trusted, the lessons you've learned, and the moments that changed your life. And if you've ever discovered the truth just in time, you're not alone. Thank you for spending this time with me. If you enjoyed this story, please consider sharing it with someone who might need the reminder that dignity, patience, and truth are stronger than deception. The end.